What were the implications of World War II? We tend to think of World War II as a great victory for the Allies, destroying the evil Nazis and Japanese. But its conclusion was disastrous for Britain, France, and the rest of Europe. Without their empires, who had lost their empires during this bloody conflict, and also for the USSR, who had lost nearly 240 million people. But World War II fundamentally remade the world, leading to a period of cultural and political dominance. And we see this happening in three main ways. Firstly, in the ending of European dominance. Secondly, in the many technological, social, and cultural changes it brought. And lastly, in its leading to the rise of USA with the growing conflict with the USSR. Firstly, we have to understand how it ended European dominance. When the World War II ended, all these countries were, all the countries in the world, but especially those in Europe, were devastated by the number of people that died. There were estimated to be somewhere between 70 and 85 million casualties. And this is a huge number that we can't fully grasp our minds around. But because so many people died, the European powers were no longer able to have as much control as they did elsewhere in the world, which led to them losing much of their power. And when we think of wars, when we think of stories of independence, we tend to think of wars like the American Revolution. However, at the end of World War II, it was generally quite different. For India and Israel, for example, both gained their independence from Britain shortly after World War II ended. But unlike America, with long, hard-fought battles, Britain basically just stepped out and gave them autonomy, knowing that they had no way of still fighting to keep any sort of control. And so as a result, Israel gained independence in 1946 and India in 1947. But in total, there were a total of 36 or so new Asian or African states that gained independence between the period of 1945 and 1960. And as Taban Lo Liang says, Africans have three white men to thank for their political freedom and independence: Nietzsche, Hitler, and Marx. And the reason he said this is because these men had caused some of the bloodiest conflicts in history. And without these conflicts, European power would have been far too strong for any of these countries to gain their own independence. As a result, Europe was completely destroyed and weakened by the end of World War II. But there was much more to the end of World War II that went beyond that. And we also see this through the many cultural, technological, and social changes it brought. It led to the invention of atomic power, with the nuclear weapons used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It brought about the use of radar technology, which was much more advanced at finding enemy planes and ships. The DDT, a pesticide that was widely used, was invented, and Fleming made penicillin, and many more antibiotics were soon developed. Liquid-fueled rockets were starting to gain popularity, and they would be eventually what led to Americans making it on the moon. And don't think that these inventions were merely American. During the war, Germans had many, many technological impacts and innovations, but for a variety of reasons, they were never able to gain much fruition, simply because Germany had basically already lost at that point, to put it simply. But the changes did not stop there. For social and cultural changes, the fashion was completely changed due to the end of World War II. See, during World War II, cloth was rationed, so people had to become creative with their fashion. Many homemade items were made for kids, such as a blanket would become a coat. And since all the men were off fighting in wars, their unused suits were perfect candidates to be made into a lady's dress. And the government encouraged this greatly. William Churchill's had some rather interesting outfits that are hard to describe without pictures, but he too joined in the wearing of these outlandish outfits that were considered fashionable at the time. And the government also encouraged people to wear white, simply because during the many blackouts that happened, it would be much easier to see people at night if they were wearing light colored clothing instead of black or gray. But fashion also took a different turn from the government in that it became a lot more patriotic. It would not be uncommon to see clothing with a patriotic picture or message printed across it, and these were widely used by women to make their dresses. We can also see the innovations of World War II through the food industry. And the reason this was because is that it was mainly developed by America simply because of the difficulties that it was going with feeding its troops. As Nicola Twilley puts it, faced with the challenge of feeding millions, the U.S. Army invested its not substantial resources into the development of lighter, longer-lasting rations. End quote. And what were these rations? Well, it brought about much processed food. As mentioned earlier, DDT and other pesticides gained prominence, as they would, even if not safe for human consumption, still would keep the insects away. Canned food, such as the Chef Boyardee ravioli and others, became staples of American diets, and dehydrated food, such as the cheese powder from Cheetos, became used as it was great for giving American soldiers fighting in the humid Pacific Islands a cheese substitute that wouldn't go bad. And for babies, they were not left out either, as they had their enriched baby formula, which became popular at the time. From Spam to M&Ms, the food industry was completely changed, and not necessarily in a healthy way. Many of these foods are extremely unhealthy, as you probably can tell, and it resulted in large populations in America getting a lot fatter, simply put, because of all the unhealthy foods they were eating. But through all these technological, social, and cultural changes, the World War II clearly had a major impact on the world. But the last way that World War II shaped the world today is perhaps the most important, and that is it led to the rise of American dominance and a growing conflict with the USSR in the Cold War. And this is mostly due to the nuclear revolution. So, during the World War II, everybody knows that America used 2 atomic bombs to destroy the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombs had the destructive force of 18,000 tons of TNT. Before then, the most powerful bombs used in World War II had a mere 10 tons. They had 1,800 times as much explosive force as the previous weapons used. But the destructive power only grew, and it grew quickly. By 1952, less than 10 years after the end of World War II, America launched its first thermonuclear weapon. It had over 10 megatons of explosive force, over 580 times the bombs used for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, just one intercontinental ballistic missile has more power than all the explosives used in World War II combined, and that does include the atomic ones. This was a huge change to the destructive power of the world. And as Phil Bobbitt says, nuclear weapons, which once mutual and uh, secure against preemption, gave to the defense an asset of infinite value. It made the hot battles of the First and Second World Wars too risky. And why is this? Well, since few countries, getting nuclear weapons is very hard, and few countries were able to do it. But because America was not as destroyed by World War II, as it had a much smaller population lost than many others of the countries, they were able to heavily invest, using their large amounts of money, into nuclear technology. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, stole much of it from America, but regardless, they still had it. This nuclear duopoly made conventionally armed powers in basically the rest of Europe irrelevant, as there's nothing that could compare to the destructive power of a nuclear weapon. So qualitatively, it made everything different. And America and Russia were quick to adapt. They made new strategies, and military roles were quickly shifted and shifted, and changed to fit the needs of the nuclear fight. But regardless, it made two clear powers emerge: the United States and the USSR, both of which had nuclear weapons. And so overall, the end of World War II shows us three clear things. It brought an end to the European dominance. It led to technological, cultural, and social changes, and it brought about the rise of America and Soviet Russia as world powers, both in conflict, and overall it completely rechanged the world back into the day.